Wow.
I'm going to play that in lottery. I'll be right back.
1,
One, 2, 1.
All right, we're opening our Zoom with playing the lottery.
Okay, well, it looks like we're live, so let's keep the bad jokes off for now. Anyways, thank you so much for joining us on Overflow. We are so glad to have you with us. If you're joining us live, definitely let us know you're here. Type in the chat, ask us some questions. If you're watching this back later, that's awesome too. As always, the purpose of Overflow is to process the sermon from the day before to really talk about how we can practically integrate these things into our daily life and faith journey. So today we have Ryan, I guess that's me, and Juno. And Juno gave us a sermon yesterday, so he's going to give us a recap before we jump into some conversations. So Juno, go for it.
Okay, it was the Good Samaritan found in Luke 10. Again, most of you know that, 10:25 through 37. And it's important just to know that the whole story started off with a question from basically a lawyer, somebody who knew the law. And Jesus threw it back to him. How do you understand it? And he says, well, love the Lord your God with all your heart and soul, blah, blah, blah. And he comes back with the statement, well, who's my neighbor? Who's my neighbor? And I think for many of us, we would like to justify us not helping other people because we think they're not my neighbor. But anyway, so I think we all know the story. There's a guy beaten up on a road. 2 religious leaders ignore him. The third guy comes up and shows just a ton of love and compassion and caring. And the guy that comes up is the Samaritan, the one that most people just despise. And yet he's the one that took the risk and gave up and sacrificed. And bottom, the verse 37, go and do likewise. And so I really do think that it is really that the point is simple, but as in most things in our Christian experience, it's implementing it that is really the struggle. And especially in our own culture, how I started off the sermon, at times it feels like everybody's asking for a handout, which may be still a little different than if I discover, my neighbor has a need. So probably could be a couple of distinctions there. And, but really it's just, we ended up with the last song, it's really just put a little love in our heart and just love on people and just do it. So that's it.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for recapping. I think this is just a very relevant parable, especially for this season of life. I think all scripture, right, is God-breathed and profitable,
yes.
And but I just felt like this parable has been very, very just engaging with culture, especially in this last year since COVID and what this looks like. And I think it's really interesting that the lawyer kind of starts off basically saying like, okay, how much do I really have to do? Or like, how little can I get away with? Who's really my neighbor? Like the person who lives to the right and left of me, like as long as I take care of them, I'm good. And like I accomplish this. And Jesus basically responds that every person is our neighbor, all the way to our enemy, and to the stranger. And I think that really throws it off because that work is never done. It's we're just our geographical neighbors to our right and our left as far as being okay. We could check off that box and we could say complete. But the fact that there's always someone in need in the world, in our own community, we can't get let off the hook very easily.
It just reminds me that a lot of the journey, probably most of our journey of our Christian experience is a journey. We're just, if I can dare to use the word discipleship, we never arrive. We are always growing and changing and learning and transforming, helping others. Like this sermon, we just can't come in and say, okay, I've done my deed for the month, I'm done. We would like to at times, and I think maybe that's even another perspective of the lawyer saying, well, who is my neighbor? It's like, can't I just be done with it? But we're never done with it. It's like, how do you say, okay, to your wives, okay, I loved you. I've said I loved you this month, or, what, I've given you enough grace this month and it's only the first of the month. So come on, just, you know what, just buck up and do it. But anyway, so.
Yeah.
Okay.
I was thinking about, putting myself in the shoes of each of the people in the parable. And if you think about, if you are the person traveling the road that gets robbed and beat up, if you've ever been in a point of your life where you were that person, maybe physically, emotionally, spiritually, just going through a really difficult time, when you're at an incredibly low point, you're often not able to ask for help. You're just beaten up and on the side of the road. And I think a lot of the mentality of people is, people who are struggling need to help themselves, or they need to figure it out on their own. And it was almost as if the priest and the Levite kind of had that mentality. Not only were they self-preserving, but they had this mentality of like, you got to figure it out on your own, lift yourself up by your bootstraps. And I think that is a bad mentality that we need to be helping people for sure. And that's going to require some sacrifice. The Samaritan, I'm sure it was inconvenient. I'm sure it was costly of time. It was definitely costly of money and resources. There was risk involved. You don't know if this person is diseased or sick, or they might harm you, or could the robbers come back for you too? They're just waiting for someone to help them. There's a ton of risk going on with the Good Samaritan, and it's not easy to help. And I think sometimes we think about, how can I help someone by doing as little as possible? What's like the most efficient or simple way? And sometimes I think that's helpful to do something rather than nothing. But just seeing how much the Samaritan was willing to sacrifice, I think, was inspiring. And then thinking about the priest and the Levite, their perspective of self-preservation that you talked about, Juno, they probably had some valid reasons why they couldn't interact with a possible dead body and defile themselves. They might have been on their way to important temple work, and
he wasn't wearing a mask.
Right? Yeah.
Oh, sorry, no, sorry, Jay. I avoided that on purpose yesterday because it just is like, wait a minute, there could have been an argument right there. So I avoided it.
For sure. So they probably had some valid reasons why they ignored this wounded person. Yet Jesus calls them out and says they're not acting like a neighbor. And then you have the innkeeper even. You've got a business and you're getting some interesting characters brought in, and it's like, here's money, but you need to care for their wounds. They might be diseased. They might be like, there's probably a lot of valid reasons the innkeeper probably could have rejected and said, sorry, we're full here.
I didn't even think about that. Yeah.
And, but he makes space, the innkeeper makes space for this questionable character to come in. And so I guess I've just been reflecting on each of the roles of the people in the parable and kind of what truth that speaks to us, like what Jesus is saying to us through that.
You know what? I'll confess, I don't know how often I've read this, and in my mind, I think I just thought the innkeeper as like a doctor or a hospital, as I've transposed it, but it wasn't. It was just an everyday person doing his job. He wasn't a caregiver. He wasn't the professional caregiver. Anyway, there's another sermon slant next time we preach it. So
for sure.
And I think and the idea of putting yourself in the shoes of the different characters, I think I also, when I teach this, I like to look for modern equivalents of these characters. And a priest and a Levite would be like, maybe, just use you, Juno, priest, someone who leads the congregation spiritually, be like, Pastor Juno. And then a Levite was generally like someone who assisted the priestly class. So maybe like one of our best volunteers, like my youth volunteers been doing it for a long time, Ryan Melchor, someone like that. So Pastor Juno and Ryan Melchor are the priest and the Levite in terms of the modern equivalent of who these characters are. I think that helps us to understand it more in terms of the people you would expect to help are the people who keep going by in Jesus's parable. And then as far as the Samaritan, you know, he's of a different ethnic background than the Jews, obviously. And that's part of Jesus' point, is like he's talking to a Jewish audience and he picks the hero to be someone they really don't like, someone they see as kind of corrupting their own religion. And they do not have a good relationship. They don't talk with Samaritans, like, you know, like earlier or in the book of John, Jesus gets in trouble for talking to a Samaritan woman and gets in trouble with his disciples. His disciples like, why are you talking to her? But I think, like, what's the modern equivalent of the Samaritan? I think it's whoever we as the audience see as the other being just someone who's really different from us and makes us uncomfortable and maybe we don't like because they do not like Samaritans. So like, I've at times thought of this parable in the past, especially more like 5+ years ago when Islamophobia was at a really big height. Maybe this is the parable of the good Muslim in that context when it's told to us as Americans. I think now with all of our political division, I've thought of this as the parable of the good Trump supporter or the parable of the good liberal, the person on the other side of the aisle who you really don't see eye to eye with, you know, and you really don't like and you want to judge and you don't want to think positively of them because Jesus' audience did not want to think positively of Samaritans. So whatever, for whoever's listening, it's whatever of those groups or whoever I've said, or maybe it's something else that kind of like you don't like, don't trust, gets under your skin. Like that's who the Samaritan is to us. And that's part of the challenge then is rethinking how we think about neighbor. And I also think one other of my takeaways from this story is Jesus says, who then is the neighbor? And they say the Samaritan. I think part of that is by definition, the priest and the Levite were not the neighbor to him. And I think we are defined, whether we are a neighbor to someone else is defined by our actions, and we're called to be neighborly to everyone. So anyways, those are just thoughts that I have. And I think thinking about it in the modern day is a really challenging way to make us rethink the significance of this parable.
Yeah, lots of good stuff there for sure. And I think about just what you're saying, you know, who's the group, who's the people group, who are the people that we are thinking either consciously or subconsciously, that's what's wrong with this country, that's what's wrong with this world, or that's what's wrong with this community. And I think if we imagine Jesus speaking to us and saying, oh, here's a parable of how you're supposed to love your neighbor, and it's demonstrated by the people you really think are the problem in this world as actually doing a better job at loving their neighbor than you are. And I think that's incredibly convicting to think about how the people we might criticize as doing harm to our country or community or whatever it is might actually be doing a much better job than us at loving our neighbor. And I think that's definitely very very telling for us. So it makes me think, you know what, let's go to question one. And question one in our life group questions is, Good Samaritan is a parable teaching of Jesus about caring for others in need. How does race play a factor into this parable? And I guess the things that come to my mind are literally the difference of races between the Jews and the Samaritans. And we know that they have like issues as far as like their people groups are concerned. But also even in present day, how might race play an issue in caring for others in need, you know?
Brian, that's a great question. Again, we're blessed to live where we are. There are so many races and ethnics and ethnicities, and it's almost like, well, would it make any difference? You know, I think I'm the only white person in my whole block here. So if somebody was hurt, you know, would it make it would surprise me if it would, but part of me probably says somewhere deep there, maybe. But like if I was in other parts of this country where it's all lily white, I think that question just rings home to many people because they're just, like I shared with my wife and the Indian guy coming to our home. My wife wasn't against Indians. She just never met one. You know, not that she was avoiding. Her whole culture was same people, same beliefs, same everything until she met me. And so, and then I take her to Detroit. And so, when she lived in the other side of the state, that's a really relevant question. But in Detroit, it's like, it's just different. Anyway, because it's so colorful, if I could use that word in a very positive way. It's now this becomes our norm, and I've talked about this before. You know, our church, our neighborhoods. This is what we would consider norm. Ryan, your kids, this is normal to them. And now when I fly back and the place is all lily white, it's like, this is not reality. But anyway.
Yeah.
So I hope for us in our culture here, your question, bringing it back to your question there, buddy. I hope deep down it doesn't make a difference. And if it does, that the Lord just keeps gnawing away at our heart to look beyond that. So.
Yeah, I think there's an interesting spectrum of engagement. You know, one of the things about this parable is you see people reaching across racial divisions to help people in need. And I think that needs to be true of today, that we reach across any division of race or political issues or whatever it would be to help people, that we never allow these specific identities as groups or people to prevent us from helping someone. You know, think about someone that you might be uncomfortable supporting their lifestyle or their way of life or their thought, but we can never come across an accident in the street and run up to help the person and say, oh, you're a different race than I'm comfortable with, I'm leaving. Or, oh, I see symbols of a different religion. Or, oh, I see gender symbols. Or, oh, I see whatever it is, political party symbols. I don't want to help you. Like, we can never allow any reason to prevent us from helping people genuinely in need. At the same time, you know, Juno, what I'm hearing you say is, you've kind of gone from seeing some environments where people, it's very ethnocentric, it's very much like one race or one color, and people are just used to that and kind of stuck in that. But then you now live in diversity, and it's just like, wow, like this is reality. Like we are all very diverse and very united, and race is not an issue because we're just used to all being together. And I think something that I've been challenged with lately is, even in incredible diversity, you know, racism can still exist.
Yep.
And it might exist in a little bit more discreet ways than it does in an ethnocentric or ethno-dominant community. So how do we, in the diversity of Artesia and Cerritos or wherever you find yourself, still engage proactively to learn what are the racial issues and what are the racial divides and what are the challenges different races are experiencing, that we can be educated about, that we can learn about, and that we can reach across the divides to help people where they're struggling. And I think one of my frustrations with negative response to the Black Lives Matter movement and talk, especially from this last year, one of my frustrations is that in a lot of ways, I think people would rather debate or talk about the issues than have a conversation with someone who says I'm struggling. And I think that's the priest and the Levite are reasoning why this has happened and what they should do and how they should respond. And they spend more time reasoning than actually helping. And so I think for everyone, you know, my challenge is, are we spending more time talking about, is something real or not? Does it need attention or not? How do we help or not? Are we spending more time talking about things than actually getting to know someone, seeing what their needs are, and really meeting them? And I think that's an important challenge for all of us.
Yeah, and to add to that, I think like when you think about the priest and the Levite in this parable, I think that you would view them as negatively, as kind of like the guilty parties in this parable, the priest and the Levite, but they're not guilty because they did anything wrong. They're guilty because they did nothing in the face of injustice, and they ignored the problem. And I think that sets a template where we can't ignore problems in our society. We can't ignore these problems when they come up, because we can't just say, oh, well, I'm not racist, so I'm not part of the problem. Well, the priest and Levite said, oh, I wasn't the robber. I'm not part of the problem. And yet they walked by and ignored it. And also, like, I think no matter how diverse of an environment you grow up in, I think we all have unconscious biases. Like you can think like, oh, I have nothing against this group of people, but do you emotionally or think react the same way, or do you intellectually think the same things about a group of people if they walk down the street, whether they're white or black or Latino or Asian? You have the exact same reactions and thoughts to a group of all of those people walking towards you. And I think, just completely honest, for all of us, I think the answer is probably no. And you can say it is, yeah, maybe if you're listening, maybe you're getting defensive and thinking, well, that's not me. But I mean, think about it. Like, do you really react the same way to all groups of people? And I think the answer is no, because it's part of our human nature and our broken human nature. And I think that's true of me as well. And that's something that I want to be self-aware of and always continue to work on. So anyways, so I think it's a big issue. And also, like, as far as going back to the Black Lives Matter issue, for some people in the congregation, maybe the Samaritan is the good Black Lives Matter protester who, if that's a group of people who you really feel uncomfortable with, then, and you feel like you're against what they're doing or what they're standing for or whatever, that's a challenge to think of them as the good Samaritan, or for people, I at least know a few people in our church who went to Black Lives Matter protest and probably would then be on the opposite side of people who call themselves Trump supporters. So it goes both ways. Yeah, so I mean, I think we can't ignore the racial component in this, and we also can't ignore racial problems in our society. And say, oh, we're not part of the problem, so we don't need to do anything about it, because that was the attitude of the priest and the Levite, and we don't want to be them. So anyways, I think we do need to be proactive and have conversations, and the Good Samaritan being an example of the other in our society, go out of our way to interact with the other, which is interact with people who are different than us, who don't look like us, don't believe the same things as us.
Hey, that's a great sermon series, The Others.
Yeah.
And you can go through a whole list of people groups and talk about the others. And what would be great is if we brought some of the others to the stage and we had conversations. Anyway, okay, but that's not today's discussion.
So I'm thinking about, Juno, you quoted Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. on saying that basically the Levite and the priest were focused on what would happen to them if they stopped to help the wounded man, and that the Good Samaritan was focused on the wounded, saying, well, what would happen to him if I don't stop? And I think that's just a very important perspective as we think about how to help people. I know one of the things that I'm wrestling with right now is during COVID, so many people need help. And I just feel so very aware. People who are sick and trying to recover from COVID, people who are, especially our healthcare workers working on the front lines, my heart just goes out to all of them who are in so much stress and experiencing so much trauma and sacrificing so much to be there and care for people. Talking with people pretty close to death from COVID and just hoping to pull through. And even just like I want to say the everyday person who's not necessarily affected by COVID physically, as far as being testing positive, but just the schools being online and people working from home, and some are working, some are not working, some have a job, then the state shuts down, then they don't, then they have a job again, then they don't have a job, and it's just like businesses, and there's just so much to navigate. And I feel so overwhelmed by this parable's reality that we're called to help others. And it's, what does that look like in a season where it feels like everyone needs help? Like everyone's struggling with different things, and it's hard to feel like, man, we need help. My family needs help. We're overwhelmed, but there's others who need help more than us, more than we need it. And so how can we go out of our way to help care for people who are struggling during this time, and just be there for them. So I mean, that's just, yeah, that's just something that I'm thinking through and kind of wrestling with, is how can I be a good Samaritan? How can my family be there for people and care for them and check in with them and support them during this time? That's just a struggle, and a long struggle, right? It's easy to meet a need in a moment, but it's a continual struggle for a lot of people. There's just a lot going on.
And Ryan, I think you bring up a great perspective. Okay, Lord, help me to see who needs help. Again, we can talk about statistically, everybody, and they do. A lot of people need help. There are, last night, today, I was getting texts from people about deaths and about COVID. And I mean, it's just like it never, I don't want to say it never stops, but there's just a lot of brokenness and hurt out there. And so, okay, Lord, how are you going to use me in a particular situation, and just go after it, versus at times it's so overwhelming, it's almost easier to do nothing, because there's just, we'll never fix it all, which is true no matter what we do with human needs. But while I can't fix it all, I can fix it for one person. And okay, Lord, then who's next? And who's next? It is no doubt an overwhelming thing. And that's where I go back, and another pastor, I am very much from the perspective of, I just think as believers, even if we take the number of churches, I think we could probably do a website search, or you can do it, Ryan, as I'm talking. How many churches are in town? How many people are Christians? We should be just knocking out these needs like crazy. There's thousands of believers in this community. And I would think somehow the light of Jesus should be shining brighter. And so, but rather than me get critical of everybody else, so what am I doing? What are we as a church doing? How can we help in whatever way we can? Because there are always be people doing squat. And, but I can't let that give me the reason for not doing something myself, or as us as all pastors of a church to help. I don't like the word kick the can down the road, because people are not cans, but to kick the issue down the road, or to help bring some healing one by one by one. And we talk about this often, and they'll know we're Christians by our love. They're not going to know we're Christians because we do a kick butt outdoor service. They're not going to think we're Christians because we have this great little program. And no, it's how we loved somebody. So if that's even where the 50 days, 50 ways of grace, or 50 acts of kindness, check that out. There are just some simple, holding the door open, saying hi. I mean, there's just some simple ways really of bringing in some healing and showing some kindness, because often it's a mean, cruel, it's all about me world. So.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and I think there's a lot of expectation, from the world on the churches to be the good Samaritan, and we end up functioning more like the priest and the Levite.
Yeah.
And I think there a lot of post-Christian attitude in America is, I thought the church was supposed to be the good Samaritan, but I realized they were just a bunch of priests and Levites who stepped over or around actual people in need in order to perpetuate their own agenda. And I think that is just a convicting, cold reality that we're working to correct. We want to be a church and a group of Christians that meets the needs of our community, with the love of Christ, the truth about him, but meeting the needs also of people, feeding those in need, or housing those in need, or giving support, emotional, physical, monetary, whatever sort of support we need to those who are struggling, So it makes me think of the Mother Teresa quote that you gave us, Juno, in the sermon, which is help one person at a time and always start with the person nearest to you. So even just who this week is in need of help, who this week near you could use a text, a phone call, a meal, just some coffee, some time to chat. who can you reach out to and just be a good Samaritan for, even in a moment? I think on a deeper level, we want to ask this question about, hey, what people group or what organization or what location in my community really needs help, and where can I be intentional there? But on a basic level this week, I think we can really reflect prayerfully on who God might be bringing us to minister to love or care or support.
And just to slow down and listen to people, listen to them wherever you're at. I mean, I was in a store this week and it appeared to be panicking. And somebody in the aisle was like, what's going on? Why? I mean, the lines were huge and it looked like there must have been a news report, or it reminded me of living in Michigan when they says 7 inches of snow coming in tonight. Everybody goes to the grocery store. It felt that way. And so just being able to, pause, listen, look at the guy, and, really give him the time of day in the sense of, just a few moments. So I just think, again, we all get way too busy, or I get way too busy and on task. And it's just so easy to ignore those who are closest to us, to think that somebody else will take care of them. In reality, maybe that's who God's calling me to help. Be the good Samaritan too.
Yeah, and I just also want to add a little more, to what you were saying earlier, Ryan. You talked about how people might think, oh, a lot of Christians, we thought they were supposed to be the good Samaritan, more like the priest and the Levite. And if you think about why a priest or a Levite might be traveling in this time, maybe they were heading to a temple service, maybe they were heading to affiliate to, or to lead a religious service and to read from the Torah and to read their version of the Bible, and going there as the priest and minister to the other Jews, in the congregation. So too busy ministering to and teaching the Bible to the fellow Jews to help actual people who need help. So the question is, are we too busy reading the Bible and hanging out with other Christians to help people who actually need help in our world? Especially people who are different than us or not in our religious group. So I think that's just an extra level of conviction there. And I don't, as a pastor, I don't want to be guilty of, too busy trying to help my people, or just the youth only, that I'm not helping other people around me who really need help as well. Not that, there's anything bad about what I'm doing, but I don't want that to consume me or to make me like the priest or the Levite. And I think that's something we all as Christians should think about, are we only helping our friends in our small groups when they need it, or are we actually helping all those around us who need help and finding ways to do that?
And that's why I think it's so good in our small groups, our life groups, when someone's neighbor is in need, that life group raises up and goes deal with it. If they need some funding, come back to us as the church and we'll help fund that. But that's so much healthier, and it's just better when the life group gets involved versus us just sending a check to help this lady. It's much better if there's just real people there.
Yeah, and I think also that's why it's so cool right now with COVID. Things might be a little different right now, but in regular time, how it's so cool when life groups will, go and find a way to serve together, come together as a Christian community, group of 7 or 8 couples in a life group or whatever, and then go and serve somewhere and actually help other people and do it together. And that's, a great way to build your own faith. That's a great way to represent Christ's light in the world. And that's a great way to be a good Samaritan to people who aren't a part of our Christian community.
And when we went to several life groups, we were going to Long Beach Rescue Mission on a, pretty regular basis. I mean, you talk about that, just helps everybody to appreciate more of the struggle of those who are at the rescue mission. And you take them out of that, those are them. And really it's like, we're all in this together. And you're right. But during COVID, I'm pretty sure that's not going to happen. But back in the day, numerous groups were at the Long Beach Rescue Mission, expanding their horizon and hopefully lowering their walls and removing some of their prejudice of what they thought people were like. at a rescue mission. It's just a great, plus it's a great organization. So, but
Yeah. Well, great thoughts, everyone. Yeah, thanks for chatting here. Thank you, everyone who joined us live today. I see Monica and Marian left us some nice comments, so thank you. Thanks for letting us know. But so good to be with you all. We hope this has been a helpful conversation to just even give you some things to think through and to do this week as we live out this scripture together. So thanks again. Enjoy your week, and we'll be back with you next Monday for the Overflow. Have a good rest of your day.
Bye-bye.